several racks of different animals that are built into it. Above the fish pond are pigs. Above the pigs are chickens. And the chicken's fecus drops down, the pigs eat and can convert it very effectively into protein and fat. And their defecation drops down into the fishing ponds, where it generates a bloom of algae and other plankton that the fish eat on and get bigger and bigger, and therefore more production. But as we know, that's an accident waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of things have been traced back to that. And I already mentioned earlier the case of what's called a wet market sometimes, where you have stacks upon stacks of animals in markets, and we were talking about that, Mario, in Latin America, nothing like in Asia, where we know the last series of influenza, H5N1, came out of that, avian flu. And it's a veritable brew. And we have all these, it came from civet cats, so we think civets, it's a cat-like thing that was over there to be bought and taken home, and then chickens right next to it, all those kind of things. SARS, which was severe, acute respiratory disease. So those, incidentally, I won't talk any more about that one, but there are all these kinds of things that you can look at, with the exception if you want to look at this one. But this is called the wet market. We had a juxtaposition of all these animals that normally have their own range, and stay away from each other by and large. They don't intimate.
Yeah, I understand.
Intimate.
Sounds like some of our poultry and meat production.
Yeah, oh yeah, the production.
No, yeah.
I talked to somebody that was weighed the chickens, and they get a few of these things out down south that Kentucky, and there was a big exposure thing.
Or the hog farms in North Carolina.
Just in general, that's just a nightmare. It's like an animal holocaust. That's the way I figure it. It's scary. It gives me nightmares. It's not true.
Now, this is actually from Alaska, but this is it's just an example. Again, nothing you have to memorize, but it shows you the human culture. And human culture, the way anthropology define it, culture is not used like we talk about who watched the latest soap opera, who has the best hits and songs of the top 10 or whatever, for lack of sounding any older than I am. But what we're talking about is, when we talk about culture in a sociological or anthropological way, is that way of life. It means all the ideas and actions and beliefs and values, and that includes religion and everything else, that make a world ready-made, somewhat at least, for a new child being born in it, a language that has certain kind of words that the child learns and speaks, and it has its own composition. So in this way, what Alaska Natives traditionally, of course, and still do today, caribou and moose are a major part of their rounds. And normally, this particular tapeworm stays in this circle here with wolves and coyotes. We don't have many coyotes that far north, but we're getting them with climate change. Coyotes are moving into east Alaska now, from Washington, who defecate in the eggs, and then that grass and lichen is eaten by a deer, where it lodges in the lung tissue, and it defecates, and dogs, when they're butchered out, the caribou are butchered out, often the lungs and other offal are just thrown to the dogs. They eat that, and then the kids play in the, or get around the density of population again, and the dogs are keeping dogs for sleds, those kind of things, big dog gatherings, and now for the big dog race, which there's some money in it, but there's a lot of dogs out there, and kids, and that little boy, toddlers start, you get in it, and it can be picked up through fur, skin, mouth, and it becomes settled in humans.
In the lungs and liver? Is that
the lungs and liver. And there's a fair amount of that every year that's still, but there's been a big, good public health thing. So these are just to show you some of those things on that triangle: agent, pathogen, and environment. In this case, looking at culture environment. This is something called schistosomiasis. It's again, worms that are in water. But these are the complex cycles, and all of you who have ever taken a biology know how this, basically have seen these kinds of things. But again, these eggs are, some eggs are retained when you have this in your human body, and we know from mummy studies that several of the pharaohs, and Ramesses V in Egypt, had schistosomiasis, pretty old business. And then, so what happens is it's in the bowel system and then in the renal system, and when you urinate, one of the things you do is you have bloody urine. It affects the urinary tract, and it's bloody. And in fact, some places in Africa, it's thought that's when a boy must be a man. There's a whole series of ceremonies when he starts having bloody urine. It's so common that that has become a marker for adulthood, because those boys are playing in ditch water and they're helping their dads with irrigation, so they're standing in these ditch waters where the snail is the intermediate host, where and the particular worm here gives birth in there, utilizes that, and then penetrates the humans, and you start the cycle all over again. So I know these are complicated cycles. You can see what it goes through, and nothing I'm going to ask you, and probably won't even mention schistosomiasis anymore. But again, a disease that's related to modernization in terms of its increases, because they created something in the 50s called the Aswan ban in Egypt. And it made tremendous amounts of stuff available, land and water control, all these canals and irrigation, but it increased the rate of schistosomiasis. It's the arms race. We don't always know what things are going to do. New developments in the East Coast about 30 years ago. Everybody wanted a green garden, green lawn, and so they cut down more and more trees, and deer overpopulated because wolves have been gone a long time. And what came out of that? Lyme's disease. Ticks from deers spread to this suburban household that expanded and cut into the woods that we were talking about before, land clearance. Where we intersect with nature like that, and especially quickly, there's no adaptational thing to be done, and not even the cultural knowledge about being aware of that. I mean, public health is always fighting that battle. We're all about done for the day. I think we'll talk a little bit. This is just again of what I was talking about before. This is cannibalism. When it ceased, Kuru progressively declined in the fore population, and you'll see females surrounded there as cannibalism declined. Taboo, down and down it went. And you can see the males never went very high for the reasons I was talking about before. That's Carlton Bakdushek. He won the, and basically that's the same thing as mad cow disease. Same kind of thing. You get that only in contaminated nervous system tissue. Now, we'll finish with that, caused by prions. Now this is something to lead you to wonder about eating hot dogs, probably.
That hurts my tummy.
Okay. It was common to feed cattle some contaminated animal feed of different discarded parts in the slaughterhouse, cattle mixed in with other stuff, and then, because when you're butchering, I grew up in a ranch. You don't always get real close to, you're in a hurry, you don't get close and trim everything off. So the vertebral system, the nervous cord and everything else, it gets thrown off somewhere, and slaughterhouses know better. That stuff gets utilized, or was, often in cow material, or food. Contaminated can go that way. The brains and spinal cords of infected cows could accidentally, in case you can't read it, I'm reading it, could accidentally end up in cow feed. That's illegal, but the rules aren't always enforced, as we know. So,
or always followed.
So it can go two different ways there. There's the folded protein in red, up to the feed mill or through the slaughterhouse. And again,
What's number 4 say completely? I don't know. The bone obscured a little bit.
yeah, thank you. Infectious spinal cord could accidentally end up in beef from advanced meat recovery. There you go, AM technology, or mechanically separated meat. Both can be used in foods like burgers, hot dogs, and meat, and pizza toppings and taco
Taco
filling.
man.
You just ruined like all my
You
favorite
just missed
foods.
the
Make your
taco.
own taco.
And I was eating a burger on the way over to this class too.
We'll check you out in about 10 years, you come
That's
back.
what you get, Tom.
Well, I'll be eating salad.
So, can you see how some of these things I asked you to think about? Transportation worldwide, where does food come from? You hear every day about our food import.
Right,
Massive population. Eat local, still better.
right.
So
As a matter of fact,
Oh,
just,
yeah.
within the last year or two, there were some, CNN reports about food coming out of Southeast Asia that's imported really cheaply, and you find it in some, low-income neighborhoods, and people are like, ooh, I'm gonna buy the shrimp because I can buy it
Exactly.
whatever. But it's coming from some of these Southeast Asian places that you were talking about, poor sections, there's no sewage, no infrastructure, so the sewage goes into this river, and then they get the shrimp, and they bag it up,
You bet.
and then they sell it here for a
So
dollar a
you can
pound.
begin to appreciate, and I think most of you do,
It's terrible.
about the importance business. Now, FDA just got their budget slashed. Already they weren't able to have enough people to check slaughterhouses, number of
The
others to see it
FDA or
compliant.
USDA?
Both,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
FDA's in particular.
It's a monster.
So, you know, we have problems as we move globally, and these are some of the things that transfer, they don't know. What did somebody tell me? I know that the flight from Bali to Denver I was about 21 hours all the time air, and as you know, in the movie Contagion, if you haven't seen it, you don't feel anything. It's in incubation. Many of these things are somewhere between 3 and 7 days incubation where you don't feel anything, sneezing or anything.
Yeah.
You can be from Bali into Quito, Ecuador,
Yeah,
somewhere within at least 2 days,
right.
depending on your hookup. And what are you carrying and who have you exposed what to?
Right.
That's amazing.
Yeah. In an airplane, it's like a little missile, an incubator missile for transporting.
The little pet.
Yeah,
There was an
whatever.
article
Yeah,
written by an
exactly.
anthropologist, biologist, some years ago, and it's called The Viral Superhighway.
Yeah.
Says it all.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, well, while we're talking about stuff like that, I learned, I think last year, you were saying eat locally, again, that rang a bell, you're doing that a lot to me today, about things like, when you go to like big dairy farms, how they're, with the hormone injections and that kind of stuff, and that's causing like, I forget the name of the diseases in humans, but it's doing something to us where like, people are dying from
Well,
it.
it also triggers these kind of,
Early puberty.
Yeah.
There's girls that go through puberty much quicker now than
Because of.
No, it's,
hormones.
Hormones in meat, milk, everything. Now they say.
I'm
you
writing-
can't drink it anymore.
I'm writing a newspaper article, in fact, as we speak, I don't know if I'll get all the resources,
You know,
about entering puberty early now for girls. You get girls that have, not real exceptional, have menopause, early menopause at 7, 8, and 9 years of age.
yeah, but see, there's a whole lot of things that go into that, like,
Yeah.
being a psychology student, if the mother's unfit, you know, the parent, if she tends to grow faster.
There are psychological aspects to this, it appears, but strongly dietary and biological shifts and changes too,
I
and
think-
pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
Our mass consumerism in this country has fed into that because we eat huge portions compared to 20 years ago. We have,
Well, it's what we eat as well.
and what we eat, but these huge portions that we eat and what we eat is unimpure food, basically.
yeah.
It's pretty hard. Yeah.
You know, we're trying to get back to eating foods that are, my family, foods that are more, closer to their natural state, whole grains, things like that. And I think when you decrease what you eat, when you go back to the natural state of food, you don't feed